Raymond, welcome to People in Legal.
Hey, hello. Thank you for having me. It's wonderful to be on your show.
So, Raymond, whereabouts are you based?
Oh, I'm in Amsterdam.
Wonderful.
One of the coolest cities in Europe. I am unbiased in saying.
Haven't been there for a long time, actually, but looking forward to getting back there pretty soon.
You should. You should.
Yeah, no, it's a fantastic place. Um, Look, Raymond, I just wanted to actually go through and give our listeners a bit of background on what you do, and because it's actually quite interesting. We had a great chat the other day
Hmm.
about the sorts of information you collect and the research you do. I'd love for our listeners to actually understand more about your business, Legal Complex, and what you
Hmm.
do.
Sure. So, legal complex. We collect data on companies impacting the legal space. We collect two types of data. In general, financial data and some background data, like how many employees are working there. And based on that, we can do some calculations, like what are the areas where there are more companies coming in, or what are the areas where more companies are raising capital, for instance, because we also track capital. Um, and in addition to that, we also see, for instance, who's investing, who the investors are. And that's legal complex, so market research in general. And we donate a subset of those company profiles to Legal Pioneer, which is the one in the middle, which is an freely accessible platform with over 12,000, I think. Yeah, 12,600 companies that are in legal, GRC, and in civic tech in general. And we can get into the definitions and the areas that surround legal in general. Yes. So those are the two companies, and maybe we can have some time to talk about Sabai, which is our newest venture in AI.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting. So, how did you get into this area? Like, how did you get into this business? I mean, what's your background?
So I studied law. I was a bad lawyer, but I was really into computers. um, I was really into computers, and for legal complex, it started when with my previous employer. We were looking at companies to acquire, and they asked me to create a list. And I went a bit overboard and created an entire database with metrics around that to figure out which were the most attractive companies. And then at some point, I thought, you know what, maybe I can try and make a business out of it. So that list kept growing, and we got in the we started during the pandemic, which was the weirdest time to start a company. And I thought this is a really bad idea, but right through the pandemic, investments started picking up, so business started picking up. We recently had a lull in 2023, so we had a high in 2022 when investments shot up in a zero interest rates environment. And now it's back on the hamster wheel. A lot of exciting stuff going on.
There is indeed. I mean, one of the areas that we're that I'm noticing in the marketplace itself is really around the AI side of things and AI technologies. I mean, where do you see the increase for and demand for AI technologies?
Yeah, so maybe we should take one step back and look at it from how we collect data. So we want to know what is happening in the legal industry. And if you want to know what's happening in the legal industry, we have to also look at the industries that are impacting legal. Simple example, we know legal tech company as companies that are servicing lawyers, but we now also know that there's only one company that's almost servicing all of the AI to all of the lawyers, which is OpenAI. So technically, we might get into a debate like maybe it's like Microsoft Word, which is also a tool that lawyers use. But we also track the OpenAIs and the Anthropics and all other related companies in the space to really get a feel for how it's impacting. So to get back to your question, the increase of demand of the increase in demand of AI technologies, if you look at the AI space in general, what I see happening is companies are investing in three areas. One is energy. The second one is chips, and the other one is data. So, oh, data centers. So you can chips and data centers are hardware, and data is the software. So they're trying to close as many deals with content publishers to get the right data in. They need bigger data centers and more energy to train models. So that's the AI space in general. And then you have a component of people that are experts in the space. And if you drill down into the legal space, we also see that trend that the demand for not necessarily the technology, but the expertise and the knowledge about the technology that is on the increase at the moment. So if you can build APIs, you are one of the first to benefit. If you can talk and educate people on AI, you're also having a boon at this time. But we still see that at the end, companies, and that is in legal and in AI in general, are still struggling to find the really cool end products that AI can service. But that has also many factors. So demand is for what I call in general the picks and shovels of the AI industry, and the knowledge to create AI products. There is where we see an increase in demand based on investment and capital flows. Oh, and hiring, by the way.
Interesting. Very interesting. I mean, I guess in the AI sort of area, I mean, what are the biggest areas that are being hyped?
So hyped is the earliest applications of AI that we saw when OpenAI started and people were able to access the API was summarizing PDFs, summarizing documents. Now, based on that, everybody started to build chat with documents and, and building contract summarizers and then making it contract reviews and so that space is, shall I say, now also represented in all of the AI database applications that I saw. We first saw that, by the way, when before OpenAI opened up the GPT store. So they created the GPT mechanism so everybody could create their own version of OpenAI as a GPT. But they didn't open up the store. But we were able to figure out that people were creating GPTs, and only people with a subscription to OpenAI were able to access it. So we created the database. Initially, we had 550, then 1600, and then we saw what types of applications people were using OpenAI for and their API. And the majority were, chatting or understanding certain legal areas. So that space is, I would say, a bit saturated. There are also spaces where there's not much. There is a like a foot race going on to figure that out. So those are the hardest spaces, and that is mostly trying to stop hallucination and verifying the output.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I'm seeing as well in the marketplace, there's a number of folks that have got software offerings where they're actually sort of saying we're releasing an AI module or an AI functionality and that kind of thing as well. I mean, what are you seeing around that sort of area?
So yeah, it's hard because there's a lot of marketing speak and terminology used. But in general, if you're just using cloud AI, so connecting to an API, there are basically two things that companies do, and that is either trying to generate a summary, or so compressing data, or expanding data. So generating more of the same. Now, generating more of the same is a little bit complicated, especially for legal, because if you don't have the right source knowledge or if you don't have access to the right source knowledge. And the bigger issue is when you aren't able to cite the correct source knowledge, you'll have an issue in saying, okay, is this right or wrong? So what most companies now are focusing on is the space where hallucinations are reduced or aren't that much of a risk. And that is when you're trying to compress information, summarizing it, making it smaller, or referencing smaller chunks of data instead of going through large sets of data. So yes, and the biggest space that I see, for instance, I have to mention it, contracts. Drafting contracts is one of the spaces that are getting increased attention. Finding the right clauses for a contract, reviewing and checking if clauses or contracts are in line with company policies. So those are the things that we, but in terms of legal research, that's, I'm not sure if you follow the the controversies, but those spaces are still a bit tricky to do things well. And the reason, by the way, things are tricky is we don't have a transparent way of benchmarking what the results will be for AI. What is a good result? And and somebody made this comment online on LinkedIn and said, legal will always have this extra risk that everything in our space is a bit subjective. It's hard to get objective. So that's also why we started Legal Complex. Just focus on numbers. It's trying to get away from what people feel and the quality of work and, and those kinds of things to get to more. And that, I think, is a big challenge for the legal space in general.
I mean, where do you? And apologies, Raymond, I'm going off script a little bit because I think it's really interesting. I think our listeners would love to find out. But I mean, where do you see AI solutions being adopted in law firms? Like what levels? Like, I mean, which parts of a law firm do you see them being adopted?
So the first adoption is getting through really long text. So if you have a long court case or legislation need to get through, quickly having summaries for that. That's the first thing that legal has adopted and is still adopting. And even if it's not vetted or not allowed, they go behind the employer's back and still use it. The second one is compiling new insights, or let me rephrase that carefully. Trying to create new insight based on the existing cases and legislation that you have. So, for instance, if you want to create a plan for how should I tackle my ESG efforts, or where can I find a good tax haven? I shouldn't say that out loud here on the podcast, but those use cases are now also being getting more trends and attention. And the latest one, and I'll post about it. I'm not sure when this show will air, but I think by the time it will be aired as well. Is agents. And agents are when you are in how we look at it is AI will give you an answer, but it is not able to take an action. Now with agents, you can even tell it to take an action. So generate this report or file this document or save this document or
Wow.
convert this document. And the first example that I used back in December was about taxes, that you just tell it, please file my taxes by April 1st or whatever due date, and it will go in, do your bookkeeping, find your deductions, fill in the right forms, and check out if it's still up to date, and then submit it to your tax office. But that's still a dream that's far ahead. But in finance, people are already using it to, for instance, figure out value-added tax to filter out value-added taxes from invoices. And Amazon is doing that. And so that's one of the future uses cases that I see for legal AI in general.
That's actually really interesting, Raymond, because what that, I mean, my mind's racing. I'm thinking to myself, could these agents actually effectively run a legal process? So if I've got a series of forms and workflows, could that AI agent run a whole process for me?
Yes, it can. So what companies are building outside of legal and now what's slowly getting into legal is what they call human in the loop. So the agent takes a lot of these actions, but there's always a human somewhere in this process to double check if the right forms are being filled in and that the right data is submitted in the right fields and stuff like that. And actually, I talked about this in one of my other articles in what types of new jobs will be created and what jobs will be will disappear. And one of them is either checking for mistakes, so fact checking, which was already a job for journalists and in the news industry, and is now coming into legal because all of the outputs for AI will have to be checked. It's going to get increasingly more difficult, by the way, because it's going to get so smart, even the smartest human won't be able to catch any of those mistakes. But for now, so that's one. But yes, we're going to start delegating more and more of these types of jobs, I call them, to AI to do them. Um, which, the famous phrase will free up our day to do more. But nobody gives me the answer to what exactly I should be doing. More of the stuff that I love. And maybe they're saying talking to people because, communication person to person will still be a popular thing with humans.
More podcasts.
Uh, or podcasting, or what we're doing right now. Um, but yeah, some will also argue we can be two AI avatars talking to each other. So who would know, especially for me on this background. So yes, it's going to be a fascinating world where we're going to enter into. There's, by the way, one space which there needs to have one thing needs to happen for AI to completely help us in legal, and that is a lot of laws need to change. So, for instance, we cannot use AI to do legal representation. It cannot appear in court to fight your case in front of a judge. However, if you get a speeding ticket or those administrative things or claims you want to cancel your subscriptions, some of those are fully automatic. So it's
Wow.
already happening. Yeah, so on some levels.
Yeah, I mean, it is incredible, the extent to which it can go. Raymond, I've got another. I'm going to sort of throw you another hard question because as an ex founder of a software company myself,
Mhm.
always interested in actually how you can actually convince investors, in the absence of profit or revenue, how to pitch to to investors.
Yeah, so I made a video about that. That's on my Spark Mini page, I think. And that is usually investors look for two things. One is, or by the way, it depends on the type of investors. So if you don't have any revenue, you're already excluding a large subset of investors like private equity, because they need revenue to fund their model. But if you don't have any revenue, you have a brilliant idea, just a pitch deck or um, or a working prototype. Two things will convince angel and venture capital investors. One is the size of the market, and that's why legal struggles in general because we have a relatively small market. If you, for instance, only sell to lawyers, it's a really small market. Um, Whereas if you sell to companies needing legal tech or citizens needing legal tech, so to instance, to file your taxes, that's a way bigger market. So market attracts investors, and the other thing that attracts them is growth. So how fast you're growing. So what companies now are employing is, for instance, making a really cool video, or they are messaging in some kind of form, creating a lot of buzz and interest, and they put up a wait list, and a lot of people are signing up. Yeah, they're using that list to say, listen, so many people are attracted to this product. So if we convert like maybe 101, 0.1% of these, we're going to make some money. So that's one, traffic, and also what's in the consciousness of people at that time. So for instance, the coolest example outside of legal, but can be used for legal as well, is a company called Devon, which said it can create a AI software developer. Um, those things, speak to a large group of people and say, "Oh, that's interesting." However, I don't think in law or in legal people find it a good thing if you're going to say we're going to create an AI lawyer or paralegal. I've personally, I personally noticed online that or at least last year, that message wasn't a popular one. But to investors, it is. So to recap, how big is your market and how fast is your growth? And by the way, both of those are challenging within legal because growth in legal is slow but stable. And VCs, especially VCs, need fast growth. So in some areas in legal, you can simulate that. We already found a couple of companies that claim to be profitable because they were able to grow really fast with revenue, by the way. So, but the tricky thing is they still raise capital. So that's the uh, flip side to the story.
I mean, is that something you actually help companies with? I mean, if I'm actually a founder of a growing software company or somebody who's got a startup, is that something you'll help them do from point of view of like guide them in terms of actually raising capital?
Yes, so that's what we do. Most people assume that we sell a lot of data or do a lot of business with investors. Absolutely not. We do business with founders and enterprises. So founders come to us with two questions. One is, where can I find investors? And what do I tell them? And where do I find investors? Usually, we're trying to track down investors that have not yet invested in a certain type of company and their type of company nearby, so they can grab a cup of coffee with them. And based on their portfolio of the investors, they can start pitching their company that would be a nice fit for their portfolio. The second thing is, entrepreneurs ask us, okay, so the investor asks us, how quickly will we grow? How will we exit? Who will buy us? How quickly will we see our money back? What are the other dangers we see in the black swan events we see in the market? So we try and answer those questions as well. First, starting with what we see as their competition in our database, what has happened to them, how their funding pattern is going, and also based on actually companies that have not raised funding and are able to hire employees are actually it's one of the key metrics of success in certain areas. So if you're able to grow headcount without ever raising money, that means you're doing something really well, or we haven't figured out how you raise capital. But yeah, you see some areas where that is often one of the key insights that we see in areas, and that's the metrics that we give entrepreneurs and founders um, to convince their investors. Because usually the investor isn't not necessarily an expert in the space, and sometimes that's a draw. How do you call it? It's not a benefit. It's a hindrance. And sometimes it may help if the investor is a particular expert in a certain area because they can make connection and help you grow. But what the investor are usually looking for is, do you understand the market and will you win? Those are the two things they're in general looking for.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, who are these investors?
Going back to our grand view of things. So if you look at the AI space where we started talking about, okay, who are investing in AI, at this point in time, what we see in our database is usually companies. Microsoft, Meta, Google, Apple, they are investing heavily in data centers, chip technologies, and trying to hire smart people to build out their platforms. And nation states are, I think NVIDIA also mentioned this, that countries are one of the biggest buyers of their chips. So that's the big AI space. In our legal space, we now start starting to see more interest outside of legal. Uh, so usually it was people that or investors that are well aware of the space have done a lot of previous investments in that space. But what we're now seeing is a lot of new unique investors are coming in. We have some charge. Apologies, I cannot run them out of my head. I'm still training to do that, by the way. Where we see that some of the areas that were previously not getting funded are now getting funded. And the second thing is we also see that the investors behind those companies are unique investors that we hadn't had before in our database.
Interesting. I mean, Raymond, you mentioned the word black swan events before, and or the phrase black swan events. I'd like to actually, I guess, what do you sort of see that as being in terms of the market?
Yeah, so black swans are things we cannot yet see, but we can calculate that if that happens, what will happen. And usually they're unlikely to happen. That's why they're called black swans. The biggest one that I see is that there is some technology breakthroughs from the AI level, from the high level, is there is some technology breakthrough where it makes it possible to run AI either locally or cheaply on more devices. So now AI is getting training AI models and huge models need to happen in $100 billion data centers. If there's some technology breakthrough whereby the models can run on cheaper chips, that's one. The second thing, and if you drill down into the legal space, is that when a new model appears, they are able to really give us answers that will be hard for us to verify if they are correct or not. And especially in the legal space. So only the experts of the experts who were able to figure it out. And at that point in time, I'm curious how we're going to be able to tell right from wrong if the only way we can find that out is asking AI. Those are a couple of the black swans that I see. I think I had a list and I had mentioned to you a couple more, but they apparently are now. Which one did you remember I was talking about last time that I missed? I think your audio is out. I can't hear you, by the way.
Right? Yeah,
Oh,
apologies.
yeah, I hear
Yeah,
you.
here we go, Raymond. My apologies. Yeah, I think we're talking about things such as DePIN was an interesting one. So decentralized physical infrastructure and actually how that might influence AI from point of view of commoditizing AI, make it cheaper to run AI type processes.
Exactly.
That was one of the other things I think we might have mentioned last time or had a bit of a chat about. But I'm just trying to think what else there was. But I mean, there are a list of them.
Yeah, one other thing is and that this is not a black swan. This is more my personal concern with AI in general. So um, the bigger the model, the more restricted it is where it can be hosted and run. So if they're going to build huge models that need 100,000 or 1,000 billion, 100 billion dollar data centers, they only can be in a few places. So they won't be all over the globe, but they'll only be in a few certain places, and they will only run in that location. So that creates a single point of failure, or maybe a few points of failure. So that is one concern that I have. So us getting access in Europe, for instance, to or having our own local model, that might be an issue. And others is that it might also not to be secure, or we cannot verify if it's secure. So that's what Apple came out and said, unverifiable claims from providers. And they went out and did also claim that, and they said, yeah, come verify that we are. So, but again, it's all about trust. And for the legal industry, our end product is always trust. How do we create trust? And those are one of the things that concern me a little bit as well.
I guess the regulatory framework and I guess laws across the world and how people sort of how people view I guess it's the legal framework globally, how that sort of works in each country actually works as well. I mean, could that be a contributing factor, or could that be a factor that affects AI?
So a lot of people have delved into the AI legislation in Europe. To be honest, I haven't. But I only look at cookies that I see pop up on my screen in Europe, and if I go to the US, I don't see them. But the thing that happened with cookies is that they, in my personal experience, they really broke the internet. And I know that everybody doesn't want to break AI because it's going to make our life wonderful. Nobody wants to go back to washing dishes with their hands. Everybody wants a dishwasher. But we also don't create just like what we did with the GDPR. So the GDPR did a lot of wonderful things, but it also had some bad side effects. And that's the in general thing that I'm concerned about. And I'm not the only one. I think many are. Um, so I'm also not in the camp of AI in general will kill us all and put lawyers out of jobs. It will put many lawyers out of jobs, but only the lawyers that aren't willing to recognize that they need to change their skill sets to something else that is needed in society for them to operate. And by the way, there's also an important point that I wanted to highlight, and that is that change starts at education, at school, at law school. We have to retrain. We need what I calculated 8 times more legal professionals in the world than we have now, but they're not going to do the same things that they're now trained for and expect to do. And that's also the scary thing that people say, I spent so much money on legal education, so I want to become this lawyer, and now you're going to tell me that this system can replace anything that I was taught at school. So yes and no, because there are going to be new things that we need to be able to do. Yeah, we need more people to do those things.
So I guess from point of view of, so you said 8 times more demand for legal professionals. I guess what kinds of jobs do you see people doing in the future? How do you see that sort of specifically impacting, I guess, legal industry jobs?
Yeah, so hard to say. And we're actually trying to avoid being in the business of doing predictions. We do calculations, but I already mentioned fact checking, so checking legal outputs, fraud detection. I mentioned, so I had three in my article. I had three examples. There was this statistic that the Dutch banks hire more fraud fighters or fraud detectors than they hire policemen in the entire country.
Wow.
So yeah, and police fight crime, and so do fraud detectors. But there's a lot more digital crime than there is people breaking into my house. Thank God, by the way, or maybe not. So that's one. The other thing is figuring out the risk of AI. So we also see now an increase of what they call chief AI officers, being those functions being created, just like when we had chief privacy officers and those titles. And people may assume for AI, you'll hire an AI expert on that. Well, actually, it's not the AI expert that would give you the biggest for your company leverage. It's the one that understands the risk and the regulations and the the legal framework around it. So, for instance, when they started training models, everybody assumed, yeah, you can train it on everything. And I heard this Google, or no, sorry, Microsoft um, AI experts say, like, yes, as a social contract, we are allowed to use everything on the web. And I was like, no, that's not how it works. You should talk to a lawyer before you go and say these things. Because I understand what he's saying. Everybody understands what he's saying, but technically that's not how the law is, and maybe the laws will change. But you understand that it's a tricky thing. Ultimately, I think AI will win over copyright law, but in the meantime, we're going to see a lot of rich litigation lawyers and IP benefiting from this trend.
Raymond, if you're a young legal professional, I guess just finishing university right now, or law school, what advice would you give those sort of folks? What would you say to them to do from the point of view of the whole world of AI?
Difficult. Honestly, personal story. My oldest daughter just turned 18 and she finished, I think it's college. And she once said to me, I want to be a lawyer. And I freaked out and I said, no. And I have a niece of mine who's a trained psychologist, I think, helping with mental health. And her businesses, she just graduated as well. Her business is booming. And I thought one of the things that lawyers do is help reduce conflicts in the world on almost every level. That will increase, so we'll need more of those people understanding how to solve conflicts, basically, based on the law and how people and societies change. So, and AI will help us. AI will be a way of figuring out what we've done wrong in the past and do it better. To give you one practical example, I think India has the largest backlog of court cases in the world. If you look at, in general, almost any country, roughly 50% of those cases that go to court are family law cases or real estate cases. And then you have labor law, and a small subset is administrative. And the cool stuff we see on TV and hear about, or IP stuff and company stuff, that's like small little sliver. But the majority are simple cases that, because by law, it needs to go in front of a judge that says, okay, this will be your new last name, fine, I'll make this your new last name. And all these things can be, just like speeding tickets, can be done with AI, can be solved with AI. So my advice would be, the problems that we're creating at the moment are far tougher and far more difficult to solve. AI will help you solve them. We have to change a few laws, like for instance, in France, it's illegal to do analytics on court cases. You can get a 5-year sentence if you do that. And that's basically to protect judges. But again, I might get attacked for that because maybe it's not the reason. But yes, I realized that court cases, judges haven't been consistent in dealing with cases. But if we have AI run over all of them and tell us, okay, why was it always different? You'll see either it was a personal, subjective thing, or there may be something in the legal code that is messing things up. That which we have happened here in the Netherlands, and our government fell over this little stuff. So yes, AI. My advice would be it's going to really grow in unexpected ways. So it's still a really great opportunity for any young person to get into the legal space and help out, basically.
Brilliant. Raymond, look, I'd like to actually thank you very much today for your time and for the insights. It's been brilliant. And I mean, from point of view of our audience and listeners, I mean, if they wanted to find out more information, where could they go?
So legalcomplex.com is where you'll find some of these charts and where you can reach out to me. Legal Pioneer, please go visit that. That's the Wikipedia of all the legal tech ideas that we were able to capture. If you're building a new company or have a cool idea, try that, try this one out first and see if it's already been done. And LinkedIn is where I get most of my communication and engagement. So if you reach out to Raymond Blyd with a Y, not an EG, on LinkedIn and send me a connection request, I will accept.
Absolutely brilliant. We'll actually also include some links in our I guess in some of the comments and things afterwards, so that everyone can get access. But again, thank you, Raymond, for your generous time, and hopefully we can have you as a guest back on the podcast again.
Next time, I will come with charts and numbers and tell you what happened in the AI legal industry.
Very
Shall
much
we do
looking
that?
forward to it. Very much looking forward to
All
it,
right.
Raymond. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.